Welcome to the Life of a Global Desi,
The podcast that connects like-minded Desis all over the globe by conforming to stereotypes and breaking them.
Join us both on a journey as we uncover what it means to be a global Desi.
Keep listening.
On to our episode now. Hey everyone.
All right.
In today's episode, we want to talk about some enduring childhood lessons that we learned growing up as Indian Army Brats. We alluded to some of these in our previous episodes, particularly about the sense of identity and growing up middle class in India. And even our guests have spoken about this in terms of being Indian Army Brats. But we wanted to provide more context and color to why an army childhood can be different from growing up as a non-army child.
Yeah, and as global Desis, we often find ourselves adapting to new cultures and environments as we travel or seek professional and personal growth. So we just thought sharing our childhood experiences as armed forces kids or army brats would kind of help us think about being global Desis in the same vein.
When we say Indian Army Brat, we want to explain the term brat, B-R-A-T, unlike the typical meaning of it being someone who throws a tantrum or someone who's unbearable. Brat actually stands for British Regiment Attached Traveller. And it was often assigned to families who were able to travel abroad with a soldier or an officer. And eventually it just came to be referred to as a term for military children. But obviously the term stuck and was adopted in many militaries across the world, including the Indian Army and the United States Army.
Yes, and our dad was in the Corps of EME with the Indian Army. So that's how we become Army Brats.
And this is also applicable for children of other defense forces, right? So they could be called Navy Brats or Air Force Brats. Why is growing up an Indian Army Brat different? The reality of an army life is that you are moving places and schools almost every 2 years. This is also true for someone whose parents are in transferable jobs with banks or government agencies in India, like the Indian Foreign Services, Indian Administrative Services, but definitely true for someone who's in the Indian Army. So when you're moving every 2 years, you're adapting to a totally new environment. And as a young kid, this can be really tough, right? As a 3 or 4 year old child, when you realize that, I need to be picking up everything that I knew of my world, including my friends, my school, my home, to a totally new place and make that your home now. It's extremely hard, but it also makes you emotionally tough, and you don't really have any other choice. When you move to a new place, you don't have the luxury of time to make new friends, so you can't really pick and choose who you're friends with. You just become friends with anyone in school, all the kids who are in similar positions as you, honestly, because their parents are also coming from some other place. And you're often pushed out of your comfort zone. You learn very early on that change is the only constant, and nothing is permanent, and you can't take anything for granted.
Yes, and you pretty much pack your whole home and move with it in and your whole house is packed in 30 to 40 steel and wooden boxes that you just carry with yourself. So this whole idea of a mobile home comes to us from pretty early on. And the experience is very different from someone who has, say, lived at the same place all their life, right? Who have this really strong sense of belonging attached to a place and a house and so on. But I think what we learn from this experience that still applies to our life as we travel as global Desis is this idea of belonging, right? And for us as kids, our parents gave us that strong sense of belonging. But as we grow and as adults, when we move around, for me at least, a quick way to find that sense of belonging is often through the things that I take with me, like it was with the boxes that we traveled with. We had toy boxes, books, and everything else. Every time I move to a new place, I always carry things that are that remind me of home. Be it like pictures. I often have a picture wall that has pictures of all the people I love on at one place. Books that I carry with me. Then also these lights. So I have these rice lights that are from my childhood room, and like wherever I go and every place I set up my room, they're always there in my every new home. So creating a sense of belonging every time I move to a new place is something, as a global Desi, that helps me a lot. And finding community, right? Like making new friends, finding local people as community in this day of technology where we are so connected over WhatsApp calls that we can connect with all our friends back home. Like it's also so important to make new friends locally in the new place that you are at. So I think just making new friends is a skill set that, the army life taught me that still serves me well.
Yeah, that's definitely both of us. In terms of finding that community and building it no matter where in the world you are, right? Another theme growing up as Indian Army Brats is that you're often very close to nature, living in the remotest of areas in India. Misamari, Dharangdhara, Pathankot, Imphal, Partapur, Dimapur. Not sure if any of these words mean anything to you, but for Aarti and me, these are some of the most enduring childhood memories. These are places we've made homes at, we've lived at for more than 2 years, almost 1 or 2 years. So often, these places only have an army base or an aviation base with a few locals here and there of that area. Unlike a big metropolitan city where you have a much more civilized, much more drawn out economies and big civilizations that you can think of. It is absolutely true that these remote places are very self-sustained with army-run schools, hospitals, canteens, open-air theatre, often just one open-air movie theatre, umpteen sports complexes, and a colony for obviously all the army personnel that live in that cant. But one enduring experience was that of being in the lap of nature. Because these areas are very remote, your geography lessons are being lived out each day by you. Be it deserts and sand dunes in Rajasthan, mountains in Siachen, rainforests in Cherrapunji, salt pans in Kutch, or arid regions of other parts of India, we've lived in all of these places and these become home, and you're very, very close to nature as an army kid growing up.
Yeah, and just things like having touch-me-not plants in your backyard, or being surrounded by fireflies, biking in the woods endlessly, snails, snakes, all the green that you are surrounded by. It was definitely a beautiful childhood. I remember distinctly one of my fondest memories is cycling on the runway in Patiala right next to mustard fields. So sarso ke khet. It was so idyllic and it was such a gorgeous memory that I keep going back to. Then camping in the some sand dunes in Rajasthan, or getting to see tanks on daily basis because that's where dad worked.
Tanks and choppers.
But
yeah.
Tanks and choppers, yeah. But so the way these lessons have translated for me as a global Desi are just holding on to nature, right? Like finding nature around me is very important no matter where I am and every new place I move to as an adult. And I think nature is something that no matter which part of the world you go to, can give you the same sense that you feel when you are in nature. So I think it's an important piece of being a global Desi, just finding local national parks to visit, or going on long hikes in and around the city that I'm living in, and then exploring just the new environment be it like the parks in the neighborhood or just like finding my footing in the geography that I'm in, right?
Another enduring theme as an Indian Army brat or Army brat is you grow up with a strong acceptance and tolerance for varied social and cultural nuances, and you accept diversity very early on. This whole concept of being able to live in a place for more than a year or two, becoming part of the local culture, soaking in the culture more than just visiting that place, you truly become a traveler and assimilate into the themes, the places, the people, the ideologies. So, to give an example, we lived in Agra for 2 years. So, we've lived very close to the Taj Mahal for 2 years. And for us, Agra is not just a place that has the Taj Mahal, but Agra is a place where we both spent a majority of our childhood at. My first school was in Agra, so there's a lot of memories associated with it. But this idea of living in a place for 2 years really exposes you to new cultures. You're often learning from different people, different ideologies. You're adapting to new situations, people. You're learning to be tough through any given challenge, right? And you're exposed to very progressive ideas about life and people.
Yes, and also exposed to people of many different cultures because our schools were so diverse. The army schools that we lived in then had, you have a multicultural upbringing. You celebrate all festivals that are there, no matter of which religion. So, because you have friends and from just about every religion, you celebrate Christmas, Holi, and Eid with just as much gusto. And then, just views and ideologies, you're just exposed to such a broader range. And even languages, like in school, when we were posted in Patiala, the second or third language after Hindi and English was Punjabi that we had to pick up. And then after I reached sixth grade in Secunderabad, it turned to Sanskrit. So just exposure to a broader range of languages, like all shaped the way we think that way. And how this has influenced my adult life is just carrying with me a sense of curiosity around culture and why do people do things the way they do in this new environment or culture. Where are the roots of some of the rituals that people do locally, or bringing that curiosity to just about every walk of life, be it food, be it festivals. And at the same time, going in with a sense of respect, being respectful of others' ideas, views, and embodying other people's culture as a sign of solidarity. Whether it be celebrating 4th of July in the USA because, hey, fireworks, and there is this environment of just celebrate people taking pride in their country, or celebrating a religious festivals like La Semana Santa or Dia de los Muertos, which is the Day of the Dead in a lot of Latin American culture. And this could look differently for different global desis across the world. I'm sure a lot of you could relate this back to whichever countries you're in and the local festival, like Oktoberfest if you're like sitting in Germany right now, and so on and so forth. So yeah, that was super important. Something to me that really stuck out growing up in the Indian Army was just how hierarchical the Indian Army is, right? And how rigid it can be, and how the protocols pretty much determine everything you do. Yeah.
It's a unique way of life. I absolutely agree. There is... it's called the army way of life, for better or for worse. You grow up at a very young age learning table manners, just etiquette, how you dress, the shoes you wear, the length of your hair, especially for boys, it has to be very cropped. Your appearance, you couldn't just walk in with shorts and slippers anywhere. You needed to be pretty formally dressed at most places if you're not at home. And this was just a way of life. Rules were pretty stringent and almost everyone had to follow them. There were no exceptions. And there was, I remember growing up, a pretty big divide in terms of within the Indian Army between officers and other ranks in the army, which again goes to speak just how hierarchical the organization is, right? We talk a lot today in today's day and age about flat structures and organizations which need to cut down red tape or hierarchy, but different organizations have different features, and it's just how an organization like a military or an army is run. So, for better or for worse, was exposed at a very early age to how there can be socio-economic divide within the same organization. And it's obviously rigid in many ways, with very little upward mobility, strict boundaries around levels of interactions, or a very stark socioeconomic class divide. And one did grow up with different sets of privileges, with limited access to some elite clubs or parties or gatherings or living spaces, even facilities, if you were an officer's child or an officer versus someone who was from the other ranks within the Indian Army. So that's definitely something for us to think about in terms of, in the world that we live in today, outside of the army, how relevant is that? And what are some advantages and disadvantages of some of that, right?
I agree completely there. I think that was one of my biggest challenges around being in the army, which was just dealing with the idea of such a stark divide and seeing that in front of you day in and day out. And for me, for some reason, that never set in, or like it was a very unsettling feeling for me, just seeing that with my own friends and seeing that like if it was seen outside of the army, I would call it injustice in some ways, because it is like unjust because of just the divide that there is, the different access to privilege that some people have and some people don't. So this lack of equality in some ways, right? Super interesting that when I was younger, I wanted to join the Indian Armed Forces, whether it be the Army, the Air Force, or any of them. That was like my biggest dream. And then one of my friends asked me, you do realize that it's a very different thing to be an army kid versus being in the army. And I think at that level, I lacked the maturity to understand what her statement meant. But now I completely see it. Even though I tried for the army many times and didn't make it, in retrospect and hindsight, feel like maybe I couldn't have adapted in that sense, or maybe that is not the way, that would be me not living in line with my values and my core values. So in some ways I'm glad, and just being witness to the life of the army was interesting now when I reflect on it. Dad used to often say, like, in the army you paint anything that is stationary and salute anything that moves, and that's pretty much the way with which it goes. And you learn to just follow orders. You can't be a critical thinker where you can question orders and bring in suggestions and expect your suggestions to be taken into consideration, because all you learn to say is yes sir, 3 bags full, and move on with it, carrying out the orders. I think army can also tend to be like a bubble. It is diverse, but it is also like an echo chamber that promotes elitism. And I often equate that army bubble to Ivy League college environments. They're very similar in just the kind of people you would meet in these places and the way they think. And you fall into this trap to take that to be how everyone thinks. But the reality is not everyone in this world thinks that way. And it is so important to get yourself out of that echo chamber and expose yourself to different worldviews. And for me, that happened when I went to college, which was like my first revelation that the world outside can be very different. Different not necessarily being wrong, right? It doesn't need to mean that. It's just a different way of life, and everyone is a product of their conditioning and their environment. So breaking away from this exclusive group and then having a more inclusive mindset towards everything that I approach. And the way this, translated to my understanding about the world outside of the army, or like just even my adult life, is the cultures that organizations have and being able to adapt to that. I think a good framework to think about this is this book called Reinventing Organizations by Frederick Laloux. But he often talks about human development in relation to organizational behavior, right? Where he says, he classifies organizations on a color spectrum of different colors. And so this framework was super useful for me to think about the army life, and then also as an adult to find myself, to see what kind of an organization do I see myself working in and belonging in. And I think this can be, as global desis, be applied more broadly to not just the kind of organizations you see yourself working in, but also the kind of countries you see yourself working in, the kind of environments you want to put yourself in for you to thrive personally and feel like you belong. Another theme that we think about often is exposure and access to facilities, right? So as our Army Brats, we had the privilege of having access to just all kinds of sports and top of the line like equipment around them, which a lot of people might not have ready access to, depending on the country you're in or like the kind of public systems you have. But things like horse riding, polo, golf, sailing, squash, basketball, tennis, badminton, just swimming pools, because like all army like men and soldiers need that to stay fit. Like we as attached families also have access to that. So that really gave us a lot of exposure to different kinds of just hobbies that one can have, I guess. But as civilians now, you realize that these are more premium resources that not everyone can have access to. You have to pay to get like a gym membership. You do not have free, not all countries or not all places have free public gyms or public sports facilities.
Absolutely agree. That was one thing I think as army kids we took for granted, and being really self-aware of any type of societal privilege that one is born into or gets access to, be it the privilege of, the class of society that you're born into, the economic strata, the kind of education that you had versus someone who didn't have that, or the kind of upbringing. It's very important to, not be in denial of it. Obviously, accept that privilege, but more importantly, identify ways in which you can share this privilege and advantage with those who didn't have the same experience as you. So as global desis, we often interact with so many types of cultures and meet numerous types of people across different countries and different areas that we work and live in. A quick example, if you grew up learning a type of sport or read a certain type of book or read, listened to type of music, it isn't always the case that someone else you're interacting with might have done the exact same things, right? And so be able to share that knowledge, practice with someone who didn't really have that sort of privilege, but be able to share that experience with someone is what I think as global desis we can do. Having shared all of these things about the Indian Army, I will also say that the army life can be extremely hard. Your parents are often posted, including you, of course, are posted in conflict or terrorist-prone regions in India, near the borders or any part of the country, the world, I suppose. Loss of life is a real thing. I've witnessed a close friend's dad be killed in combat with terrorists in the Northeast region. Life is definitely ephemeral in that sense. Our father was also posted in Siachen in very harsh weather conditions. You're often away from family for long stretches at a time. You may not be seeing them for months, if not years, if you're posted in the field area. And so that can be pretty hard growing up as an army kid, and you see all of these firsthand, and of course with your families too.
Yeah, and life is hard, and every profession has its own challenges. And saying that when the going gets tough, the tough gets going is something that we've heard over and over again. growing up as Army brats. And I think that's a lesson that we take with us, even as adult global desis. Recognizing challenges, but more importantly, being brave and courageous in the face of it to try and overcome them is a lesson that I think we definitely carry with us through that. So another thing growing up as Army brats is this idea of patriotism, right? Like most people would feel patriotic towards their country, whether they are in the army or not. But we grow up with this added layer of seeing your dad in the uniform, fighting for your country at the borders. So definitely grew up with a very strong sense of patriotism. I still tear up every time I listen to national anthems, and I get goosebumps to the national anthem on Republic Day or Independence Day, and I still get goosebumps. But something else that now I am thinking more critically about, especially as a global Desi traveler, where I'm embracing other cultures and other countries, supporting other teams for FIFA and things like that, is this idea of forced nationalism, right? And I think we've gotten to see that a lot in the past couple of years in India, with a lot of right-wing Hindutva fanaticism around just people promoting forced nationalism through mandating as law having to stand up for the national anthem in movies or in movie halls. Now, I am super patriotic, but like I would question and I would argue to ask how different, like how does that make us as a democracy any different from a dictatorship like China or any other communist nation out there, right? So, yeah, mixed feelings on that front, even as an Indian Army brat.
Those were some of the things we wanted to share about growing up Indian Army brats, and also what one took away from a childhood like that. The Indian Army is, over the past few years, been a more sought-after career option for a lot of people because of the various changes that have been made in terms of the lifestyle, the kind of pay scales and all of it. And we have a number of friends who have joined the Indian Army and are definitely enjoying that. So I guess the other thing we wanted to bring to light was, I think because of all the ways in which you're brought up and the skills that you pick up along the way, Army brats tend to be extroverts and are pretty prominent in the fields of entertainment and beauty pageantry. So there's a number of names that come to mind. Of course, Priyanka Chopra, Aishwarya Rai, Sushmita Sen, Lara Datta, all these folks are Army brats and Army kids. You also have movie stars like Anushka Sharma, Preeti Zinta, Simi Grewal, obviously Bruce Willis, Reese Witherspoon, Bob Marley apparently, and of course many people in the business world, including Sabir Bhatia, Vinod Khosla, and so on and so forth. So I guess there's definitely something in terms of the kind of personality that you develop being an army child, for better or for worse.
Not to say that all army kids make it really big, or like no civilian kid makes it that big. I guess it'll be interesting to see how strong is the correlation there.
Other Army kids, Indian Army brats, Fauji kids, or not, please reach out with your comments and let us know if you have any questions or if you found anything confusing, and we're happy to share that. And please write to us at Life of a Global Desi and on our social media. Stay curious and keep listening.
Peace out.
Hey Desis, if you enjoyed this episode, then please rate, review, and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you're listening to podcasts.
And drop us a note on lifeofaglobalDesi@gmail.com or our social media to keep up this awesome dialogue.
Oh, and don't forget to give us a 5-star rating.
You're so cheap. Why are you asking them for 5-star ratings?
Well, I always ask for the rating I want, not the one I have. You know, like dress for the job you want, not the one you have.
That's like the stupidest thing I've heard all day.
Aarti, you're so judgmental. You need to stop being
Listen,
judgmental.
I just think you can't be so demanding. That's all.
You ask for what you want.
Bleh.